Hi, Unusual Grace family. Welcome back to the channel. It is always a pleasure to see you. If this is your first time here, please consider subscribing and give a thumbs up or two. Well, you can only give one so that this message will get out. I have an important conversation for us today. Stay tuned. Now, just about a day ago in the Jamaica Observer, there was an article published, and we're going to go through that article. I really want to give a response, give my thoughts, my views on the claims made in this article. But pretty much we have this archbishop, a Roman Catholic bishop, I think, who is asking for the speaking of tongues to be prohibited, banned in schools. I find that statement, that recommendation, that sentiment to be quite interesting. Of course, if you have been following the news or this channel, this is right on the heels of the Oberlin event, which happened, I think, on October 26th. I think it was October 26th. Time is flying so much. And that spurred that triggered a series of discussions. And persons are anticipating that the Minister of Education may very well announce no more devotions in school. Personally, I think we're not there yet. But then anything is possible with these people who are in secular institutions, who are serving in, leadership, politics. Anything is possible with them. But let's look at the article. Let's take a look. The Jamaica Observer. So here we go. This article was published on the 6th of November. Speak in tongues no more. Archbishop of Kingston calls for the practice to be prohibited in schools. And the article here is written by Jason Cross, a staff worker at Jamaica Observer. So let us begin. I want us to examine this article carefully, and we are going to we'll stop in between. I was going to say paragraph by paragraph, but let's go. Following numerous strange occurrences in which children fainted during morning devotions at different schools. Let's stop right there. First of all, Unusual Grace family and our lovely visitors, let me tell you, there is absolutely no truth to this statement that the article begins with. There is no truth to it. Following numerous strange occurrences, in which children fainted during morning devotions at different schools, no, this cannot be substantiated. And let me tell you, so the Oberlin event happened, that was Oberlin, and I think a day or two later, there was the Rollins Success Primary School or something like that in one of our rural areas, in one of our other parishes. And the media tried to make a big deal out of what happened at the school, trying to suggest that it was a similar occurrence to that which happened at Oberlin. And when they checked with the principal, and I think that the principal's word should be taken as is, seeing that she works there, and no other student, parent, or teacher has said otherwise. No, the principal made it clear that one, there were some students who fainted, but it had nothing to do with a devotion. It did not occur during devotion. It did not even occur during lunchtime or anything like that. What the principal said was that the students were on the outside doing an activity in the morning for mathematics with their teacher, and they were out in the sun and so on. She said these are grade 5, grade 6 students, and they probably were hungry and so on, and a few of them fainted. And she said she has over 1,000 students in her school. 9 children fainting on one morning is not a strange occurrence. And she made that clear. What does that have to do with devotions? Tell me. And then we're going to see some other schools mentioned in this article. And as an educator myself, being close to the system, knowing a few people who I can call on, I can tell you this article has already started on a false premise. Let's continue. So following numerous strange occurrences in which children fainted during morning devotions at different schools, Roman Catholic Archbishop of Kingston, Kenneth Richards, has called for the speaking of tongues during worship exercises at institutions to be prohibited. Interesting. Let's continue to see where he goes with this. Discussions surrounding the speaking of tongues were raised on October 26, when students of the Oberlin High School in St. Andrew fell to the ground and started behaving strangely during a religious exercise at the institution. The frightening ordeal forced school to be dismissed early. That is a fact. On Friday, that fact can be substantiated. On Friday, the Jamaica Observer received reports that have not yet been confirmed. Did you hear that? That have not yet been confirmed by administrators of the Mergrove High School in St. Andrew that students at the institution were affected in a similar way during morning devotions on Thursday. Okay, so as far as we know, this has not been substantiated. Why mention it? As if this is now a pattern, this is now a trend. This has not been substantiated. It has not been substantiated, and I have a very strong feeling that it will never be substantiated. All right? So, just letting you know that. Let us see the rest of the article. Attempts to get a response from the school on the matter did not materialize. Chairman of the board, the school board, David Hall, told the Sunday Observer on Friday that he was unaware of the incident. However, students reported to parents that the incident occurred. If the prayer is an emotive one, especially involving tongues, it can elicit a particular kind of response. So I think that in situations, general devotions with over 600 children without persons involved in ministry, understanding the dynamic that is part of the experience, you should restrict speaking in tongues, the Archbishop said on Friday. All right, let's talk now, Mr. Bishop. Let us talk. If the prayer is an emotive one, what is he suggesting here? Now, there are a few things that if the prayer is an emotive one, especially involving tongues, that there can be a particular kind of response. General devotions with over 600 children without persons involved in ministry. Now, first of all, what we're seeing here is that the Archbishop is identifying a so-called problem, whether real or imagined, and he is presenting a solution. Now he says if the prayer is an emotive one, especially involving tongues, then it probably should be restricted because it elicits a certain kind of response in people. Is he trying to suggest that prayers are not to be emotive? Our emotions are a part of who God created us to be. We have emotions. And while I do not support an out of control type of behavior, as if you have no control over anything at all. While I do not support that kind of thinking or exercise, I think it is okay for someone to become passionate or impassioned during prayer. Now, to suggest that because it elicits a certain kind of response, what does that mean? People have been praying emotive prayers and speaking in tongues for years. And is it that because, what kind of response, sir, do you expect during a time of prayer? And what kind of response? Because people have been praying in tongues and speaking in tongues and praying impassioned prayers for years. And for the most part, we stand up under it. We're not falling out. Could the falling out of the students at Oberlin be as a result of something else? Are we going to now suggest that it is just the speaking in tongues that caused the falling out of these children? Just the speaking in tongues alone, not the message, not the atmosphere or the condition of the students, like maybe those who had seizures and asthma attacks, and there's also the psychological part of it, what they call mass hysteria, but there's now a more fanciful term for mass hysteria. Since I'm not a psychiatrist, I don't even remember it, but I saw it recently in the Choose Life International webinar. So it is just the speaking of tongues alone. So that would mean that when you, sir, hear someone speaking in tongues, you should fall out. When I hear tongues, I should fall out. And because that is the effect of speaking in tongues in a public setting. He also said with over 600 people. So does that now mean that if you have 599 people in the room, it will be okay to go ahead with it because we have not passed the limit? What are you saying, Archbishop? What are you saying? Now, I want to point out where he says, without persons involved in ministry understanding the dynamic that is part of the experience. I am in full agreement with having trained ministers, pastors being a part of general devotions, because they understand ministry, they understand the word, and they can offer guidance and so on. So I can appreciate that aspect of it. And I think that's where the discussion should be going, rather than to say, let us now restrict, ban, or prohibit speaking in tongues. He pointed out that speaking in tongues is an activity that charismatic and Pentecostal movements use during prayer. Now, that's true, but it's not just prayer, it's during worship as well. It's not just prayer, during worship experiences as well. So that's true. He described it as effective, but pointed out that schools lack the necessary guidance and experience to manage such a practice. Okay. Effective, but that the schools lack the necessary guidance and experience to manage such a practice. Okay. So speaking in tongues is what they can't manage. Well, could they manage prophesying? What if someone's had a word from the Lord, as was the case, and decided that they were going to prophesy? Would they be able to manage that? Because I think he's right. I think he's right in saying that schools lack the necessary guidance and experience to manage such a practice. Fine. But is the solution to ban speaking in tongues or to prohibit it? I think that goes a step too far. He says, the article says, despite his views on speaking in tongues, Richards does not agree with a ban on prayer in schools. So we can agree there as well. We can agree right there as well. So he wants to prohibit speaking in tongues, but he says, let the prayer remain. We can agree. Good. Very good recommendation. It is effective prayer, but sometimes people might be having various challenges they are dealing with. So it kind of excites and creates a particular response where persons need somebody to guide and minister to them. No problems with that, for sure. Sometimes people get physically expressive. If you have a big group, people are going to be in varying emotional states and consciousness with respect to spirituality. That is also true, and I can appreciate that. If it elicits that kind of response, persons are not there to minister to them and guide them through the experience. Administrations need to seek counseling from church leaders to give guidance to schools. Wonderful. I believe that to be true. First of all, it would be wise. Many of our schools are church schools, schools that were started by the church, and the church is still very heavily involved in the church, in the schools. And therefore, even for schools that might not be directly attached to a church, I think churches can seek to adopt some of these schools. So every school must have an assigned chaplain, an assigned minister who is trained and ordained and so on for the task. And, there should be some kind of communication going on among these ministers. For example, we've heard of situations where students who are dabbling in the occult manifest demonic presence and activities while at school, and the Christian principal or leader or teacher would have to do some deliverance ministering right there. But sometimes, depending on the situation and how deep, how far it goes, they might call on another minister for assistance in setting the child free. So there have been those kinds of instances. So I believe that every school should have a pastor or minister that is assigned and that gives the proper guidance and so on. And I think it is important for us to recognize that there is a difference between guidelines and rules and regulations. And I'll say a little bit more on that shortly. So, Father Kenneth Richards continues by saying, I don't think we should wholesale lockdown devotions as a knee-jerk response, but get the necessary guidance from ministers who can give direction and assist school administration. We agree there as well. We should not lock down devotions, but we should lock down speaking in tongues. All right. So he is introducing an aspect that is in contravention with his recommendation now for guidance. He continues, I don't think taking steps to prevent prayers in school is going to be productive. And yes, we can definitely agree there. Jamaica has the advantage of seeing other nations that have removed prayer and the Bible and devotions from their schools. And we have the advantage of seeing that, and that it has had lasting negative impact on the children, on the family structures, and so on. When we remove what has been the foundation and the anchor of our moral fiber, and whatever guides our ethical conduct, morality, values, and so on. Once we remove that, we are heading for destruction. And so we have to be very careful. So it really needs to remain in our schools. And I can agree with that. with recommendations from the Minister of Education and Youth, Favour Williams, devotion was halted at Oberlin High. Okay. Williams said that instead of mass devotions, the exercise should be confined to individual classrooms and not in the auditorium. That was the end of the article. I mean, what a way to end, what a note to end the article on. That is just an appearance of doing something in light of everything that has been said. You can have devotions in your individual classrooms, but not in the auditorium. Okay, well, at least devotions are still going on there, but I hope this is not a stepping stone to something that we are anticipating but do not want to hear. And I leave that there. Now, there are some things that were said in the article here that was focused on statements made by Archbishop Kenneth Richards that are true, and I can agree with them. But I think my main contention or bone of contention with his claims or recommendations in the article is his call for prohibiting the speaking in tongues. Now, my position on speaking in tongues personally is irrelevant in this discussion. I acknowledge speaking in tongues as something that is practiced in our culture, and my basic understanding of the scripture as well, which I will not get into. All I will say is, if the Lord leads you to speak in tongues as being led by the Spirit. Okay? That's one. But I think we have to recognize that different ones of us are at different levels of maturity as it relates to our faith. They're in a school setting. You will have teenagers who are Christians, teachers who are Christians at different levels of maturity in their faith walk. There will be those who are not Christians. They're just unbelievers altogether. And there are those who might be of different religious faiths. You might have children of Rastafarians in the school. You might have Hindus, Muslims, and so on, and different denominations and all of that. So we acknowledge that there will be a mixture there and so on. Now, saying that to say that if in a worship experience in an institution, a teenager gets overly expressive, burst out in tongues as her worship unto God, that's her culture in her church, she has not been taught any other way. If we are going to put a law in place, a rule in place, or some kind of, something like that, if that's what we're going to put in place, when a child now in worship experience genuinely worshiping the Lord and burst out like that and so on, has not harmed anyone, has not done anything to anyone, that is how she is worshiping. And notice I said burst out, maybe an overwhelming gush of something, because we see those kind of things happen. Now, if this is going to be something that you're going to make into a policy, no speaking in tongues, this is strictly prohibited, ban it, and so on, then you're going to have to put sanctions in. Are you going to sanction someone for expressing themselves in worship unto the Lord God Almighty for speaking in tongues? There is a difference. When we say guidelines, we are pretty much putting in place things that we call, recommendations kind of thing. Guidelines leave room to exercise some, practices and behaviors and so on, but it must be in acknowledgement of what's surrounding you and so on. So it's a guideline.
How do you see these assemblies unfolding, and what are they to look like, and what are the parameters to be when these exercises are being conducted?
Well, I think what you're asking is whether we would do well to have guidelines
To have
guidelines,
right?
guidelines, which are different from protocols. And I hear the words.
Maybe we need those too.
No, but I'm saying I am not for protocols.
Okay.
I am more for guidelines. Because I believe we should repose in our education educators the competence to know the difference and how to sensitively, responsibly, and maturely create a framework which, even if it is couched in certain church, denominational, religious expression, it is not there to proselytize, therefore to convert the youngster. It is there, I go back to my term, a character formation.
So hold on, stick up in your Rev. This is a very crucial point you're making. So guidelines versus protocols, you clearly know the difference. Tell us what the difference is between a guideline and a protocol, and then tell us the guidelines as you see them moving as a way forward.
Okay. So a protocol would be a TVJ. When you come in, only Carl Johnson or Neville Bell or Spoon can come in. When they come in, they must be wearing that suit or clothes. Next thing, they sit in that chair. Thirdly, they wash it. So there are certain specific steps. A guideline would say, ensure that whoever enters the building properly attired.
Gotcha.
Things like that. So
Except properly attired leaves room for discussion based on what you consider properly attired to be.
Precisely. So a protocol is more rigid. So that's why I made a point that we need to remind ourselves what role devotions, assemblies, chapel sessions ought to play.
So I would have preferred, personally, if Father Kenneth Richards had said that he strongly, even if he uses the word strongly, he strongly discourages the practice for these reasons, but we must be careful or something like that. But to say that you're calling for it to be restricted and then to talk about emotive prayers, eliciting certain kinds of behaviors. So what kind of prayers are we supposed to pray? How do we leave our emotions totally out of prayer and worship and anything else that we do as an expression of worship? I mean, there are some people who are more expressive than others. I am not known to be one of those very expressive people, but I do have emotions and I do get impassioned sometimes, depending on what, what's going on and what I'm talking about or doing and so on as it relates to ministry. So to say that you're banning it, I think that's going too far. I really think that is going too far. And it is going too far because having a ban on something also has implications for what you do in private when something is just totally banned like that. So in the same way, if you think about any law in Jamaica that is illegal right now, if you do it behind closed doors, it would still be illegal. Okay? If you do it behind closed doors, it would still be illegal. If it's illegal in the streets, it's illegal behind closed doors. So if someone know, a teacher or somebody else, maybe among a group of friends, it could even be an ISCF meeting. Well, let us not put ISCF meeting in there because he did say general devotions with over 600 children. But there are some institutions where ISCF concert, Interschool Christian Fellowship, for those of my overseas friends who do not know what ISCF is, it's Interschool Christian Fellowship, where Christians come together from different schools for worship experiences, for fellowship, and for teaching and studying the word, and they do other activities as well. I was a part of ISCF when I was going to school, and even while there as a teacher. So if an ISCF event is keeping and a preacher comes in and the entire school is there, this is not a regular devotion, this is a Christian concert, and right there someone decides to speak in tongues in the privacy of their space, but the people around them are hearing that. And that's another thing too. Is it that you should not speak in tongues on the microphone so that all 600 people can hear you? Or what? Where do we go with this? Where do we go with this? I really do think that that's going too far. And I would not support, a ban on speaking in tongues. I think that those things should be left alone. People should be given the freedom to express themselves in worship, but with guidelines. Guidelines are different from, prohibitions and so on. But with guidelines. And again, I continue to say, I am waiting to hear what these protocols and guidelines are going to be from the Minister of Education. Minister Favour Williams, I want to encourage you, whatever decisions you make, please ensure that your decisions are in keeping with the scriptures and that they please God. And in the long term, if your decisions are adhered to, will bear fruit and not work against us. We have a rich culture, a rich heritage of Christianity in this country, and it ought to be preserved. Take a listen at the veteran educator, Mrs. Esther Tyson. Consult with some ministers on the matter. There is a Jamaica Umbrella Group of Churches, JUGC, and there are other united bodies of Christian pastors, ministers, bishops, and so on, that you can certainly get some advice from. So I hope that the people who sit at the table to discuss these things are not non-Christians who are promoters of a subculture trying to get devotions out of schools. And finally, I want to say to those of you who are watching and you didn't know, it is not true when you hear people say that children are being forced, children who are not Christians are being forced to participate in Christian activities. That couldn't be further from the truth. As an educator myself, I know for a fact that when parents, for instance, write to the school to say, my child is so and so and so, and based on our belief system, I am asking that my child be excused from such and such and such. The school obliges the parent and they put things in place to deal with that. There is no forcing of anything going on as it relates to religion in our schools. People are free to evangelize, and I want to let you know, I prefer to know that Christian students are evangelizing to win others to Christ than to know that there are students who are embracing lifestyles that are in total opposition to the word of God, and they are recruiting other children for that. I would prefer the Christianity. That has more results, more benefits from past in the history and for the future. We have confidence in that. We know that the other things, not so much. Hey, God bless you. Thank you for listening. What are your thoughts on the article? What do you think about my assessment? Leave a comment below. And remember, subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and get the word out. Okay, see you in the next video. And until next time, don't you forget it, God Speaks.